Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, this is Nick Anastasiou, story editor on Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Bad Batch. And you are listening to Aggressive Negotiations.
Hello and welcome to Aggressive Negotiations and all the starships in the Sea of Stars. I am just one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and I'm so excited to be with you and have with me, as he is, every single week, that esteemed, nay, wonderful, enjoyable, bald-headed Jedi Master, John Mills.
In the morning to all of the freighters out there. In the morning to all of the Mon Calamarian sea cruisers that are out there. In the morning to all of you. Because in the galaxy, it's morning somewhere at all times. So
It's true.
Hello.
It is. It's
Hello
always
and in the morning
somewhere.
Yes, it is. Always. You know what? I like that. That should be our slogan. It's always morning in Star Wars. Right? There you go.
Amen. Amen.
I like
We're
it.
so excited. We're going to have a really fun show tonight. We're going to be diving back into the Jedi Apprentice series, and we're getting very close to finishing that series. We actually only have, after tonight, 2 books left officially, and then there are the specials that they did. So we're getting close. It's been a long, long road, but I'm really excited to be getting to this one. Before we talk about A Call to Vengeance, want to remind you, you can find us all over the place. We'd love if you would follow us on Twitter at the Jedi Masters. And of course, we got the entire network at Joy Nerd Party there on Twitter. You can find us on Instagram at the Nerd Party. You can also find us online at thenerdparty.com. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/thenerdparty. And maybe you haven't done this, but go over to wherever you're listening to your podcast. Make sure you're subscribed to the show so you get it as soon as it drops. And we have not had a review on Apple Podcasts in a while, and we really appreciate those because mainly they really do help the show grow. So we'd love it if you would give us a review and a rating, and we read those reviews on the show. So all that said, John, we are going to be talking about, as I mentioned, the Jedi Apprentice series, this book called A Call to Vengeance, and this one picks up right where the last one left off, and Tal has just died, and as per the title, Qui-Gon has vengeance in his eyes.
And in his heart. And the cover is a little unsettling to see Qui-Gon with an angry look on his face and, grasping the saber. And, so the cover is interesting immediately. It sets the tone and everything like that. And you know that I'm all about spending time with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan during this stage. And I think that it continues to be very interesting where I think, have been approaching this whole series as thinking, how could this or does this still fit within the quote-unquote new canon, as it were? And that's the first thing I want to bring to the floor with you here is I think this book is yet another one that very much survived. I mean, obviously, this is wrapping up an arc. So if any part of the arc would work in the sort of Clone Wars series approach to the new canon, then this one would too, by extension. But even taken as a solo story, it seems to do everything that we do love from the Clone Wars or the Bad Batch or Rebels, where it has that poetic rhyme for what Anakin is going to go through. And you could actually take the things that happen between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon here and actually use it as shading to whether Obi-Wan would have been more willing to overlook some things with Anakin because he'd seen this in Qui-Gon. And so he would have been more relaxed to say, things are going to work out. I'll let him have his moment here, and we'll talk about it later.
I'm really glad that you brought that up because I do think that this experience for a young Obi-Wan Kenobi does have a major impact on the way I view his treatment of Anakin and his allowing of Anakin to kind of have this flirtation with Padme, this idea that maybe, even Jedi can have a little something on the side, you know what I'm saying? And still be okay, and that they could put that aside. We see how difficult it is for Qui-Gon here for him to do that once Tal has died. And it does actually even take Obi-Wan at the end of the book calling out his name, at least that's what he thinks it was, to bring him back, from the brink of committing an act that he would regret. And in some ways, they play that off in the book as if it was actually kind of Tall calling out to him because it wasn't Obi-Wan. But I think it was a mixture of both. Obi-Wan's presence being there has an impact on Qui-Gon pulling back, and I think it brings up the memory of who it was that he is, quote unquote, avenging, and that would be the last thing that she would want.
What I would say is that I do want to double back to this, where you seem to approach it from the idea that it wasn't necessarily Tall that he heard, whereas when I read it, I approached it from the standpoint of, okay, I know at the time this was written, it's going to be set up that what Qui-Gon did in terms of retaining his identity was extremely unique. It caught Yoda by surprise. Even Yoda didn't know that secret. Or he sort of knew, if you go with the secret missions, whatever. Let's put all of that aside. But you can still contextualize it as, of course, Qui-Gon would be the one to hear if Tall, who had been so close to him, if that curtain between the netherworld and, the living force would have been thinner for Qui-Gon. He would have heard her voice through time, or because Qui-Gon, as we all know, was the one who was closest to the world between worlds. And if time means nothing, then he could have heard Tall, as an after effect. I think that even more important about that is the fact that Watson, I think, takes because this is a young adult series, takes a very important philosophical approach to it as saying the important thing isn't whether Tall was really speaking as a spirit to Qui-Gon, but Qui-Gon acknowledging he'll hear her voice no matter what because she's a part of him. And I think that's a good sort of thing, especially in a young adult's book, to reinforce, is that as opposed to the way I can sometimes have a problem with it stated in other parts of the saga, here it seems to take a very mature stance of, yes, people are gone, but what they were to you and who they were to you, that part doesn't go away.
I think that's a really good point.
But I do want to come back to, you don't believe it was Tall speaking to him, or you do? Or do you think it's one of those things where it's just so completely unimportant whether it is, that it tables that sort of conflict of whether Force ghosts really exist or don't, or whether they're known about at that time?
There is no conflict. I don't think it's important. I think the importance is that whether or not that's a subconscious part of Qui-Gon crying out, and it comes in Tall's voice and or a voice that he recognized because he thought it was Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? And it's not until afterwards when Obi-Wan says it wasn't me that he thinks to himself, it was Tall, right? That it was her calling out. And so again, I don't think it's necessarily the importance of who. What the importance of is, like you said, him realizing that she isn't gone because everything that she was lives in him and his memory, and all that was good about their relationship and everything that she did for him and everything that she meant to him, all will still continue. And in many ways, I think that continues in the form of somebody like Obi-Wan Kenobi, who, we've seen throughout the series how a master and apprentice grow so close and begin to mean so much to one another. In fact, the book even makes a great point of that by having Band here, who is also Tall's apprentice, struggling with the fact that, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon hadn't called her to help them to find her. And so I think, what we really see is that there is a beyond, master and apprentice relationship that happens with most masters and apprentices that really creates something unique, right? And that it's almost kind of ineffable to describe what it is, but it's there, and that's the thing that where true Jedi are able to be able to have this beauty of that they love, but it's not possessive. And, that's the line, obviously, that Qui-Gon comes very close to, is that his love for Tall almost comes possessive in the point that he would avenge her death because he is unable to let go instead of bringing justice. And the definition between those two is very, Obi-Wan even thinks to himself this idea of that there's a difference between revenge and justice.
There is, and it's fascinating because having a go with Qui-Gon being the one having trouble controlling things is really interesting because it also, I think, highlights the idea that Qui-Gon, he's almost elevated, even in my own view, to almost like a sainthood status. And I think it's a good reminder to have a story where even the saints were humans. And it's
absolutely.
okay. It's okay to acknowledge that about them, that they had their own trials. And even if, the debate becomes, though, if Qui-Gon had failed this test of spirit, I'm very curious as to what would have happened with Qui-Gon. Would he have been expelled? Would he have had to leave the order? Would he have, what happens to him if that voice, whether it's Obi-Wan or Tall, had not prevailed, had not made him snap out of it? What's the punishment? What happens to him? We see precedent in the later, it's how can precedent happen in the later story, but you know what I'm saying. We see precedent that Anakin's not kicked out. We don't know how many people know about the Tuscans, but we do know that Anakin has a habit not to follow the rules. So what do you think would have been the punishment for Qui-Gon had he not pulled back? And should there have been a punishment for Qui-Gon for getting them all into this crazy mess to begin with? And, should he have been sent on a sabbatical? Is the next book going to, I don't know. I wonder, would the next book, would it make sense for it to be a sabbatical for Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, where they just go off and they're like, listen, you guys aren't going to go on any missions. Just go off somewhere. Go on a retreat, get back in touch with yourselves.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting parts about this book is the fact that Mace Windu is the Jedi Master who is sent to help them along with Brandt. And I think that's fascinating because, Mace is seen in the prequel era as kind of being the one who's the most dogmatic about the views of the Jedi. And therefore, his willing to, in this book specifically, to allow Qui-Gon to have his space to deal with these issues is fascinating to me. And I think that it shows the ways in which the Jedi, to kind of answer that question, there is a grace because they are still beings that are not perfect. They are not going to make the right decision every moment of every day. And what we see here is that Mace gives Qui-Gon the ability to fail or succeed. And so I think that is something that's really interesting. And so I think that if Qui-Gon had failed, there would be obviously a period of introspection and all of those type of things, but he would be given a chance to redeem himself in the end because that's what the Jedi are all about. And it's difficult too because, in the end, Qui-Gon is after a murderer and somebody who is guilty, and yet it is not the Jedi way to kill an unarmed person, right? That's not the Jedi way, and so, yeah, it is a really interesting question, but I would come to the fact that I do think that Qui-Gon would be given the ability and the choice to either work to rehabilitate himself or to be able to walk away maybe from the Jedi.
See, I think there are two things here. One, I think there would be a mandate, or rather, better than a mandate. Mandates are silly. I'm thinking law, that there would be something have been passed by the Senate, since the Jedi act as an arm of the government that if a Jedi failed, there would have to be a set disciplinary action for it, an expectation of discipline, because the Jedi are essentially the super police. And if a cop gets out of line, they're supposed to be punished. So if Qui-Gon got out of line, he should be punished too. And I would imagine there has to be some sort of law in place to demand that, to say, okay.
Sure.
But otherwise, you just set up the Jedi to want to take over, which, maybe we could peel that onion and say maybe that's why everybody believes the Jedi are ready to take over and are willing to suddenly believe the Jedi because and yes, I know we're getting therefore into the Clone Wars and stuff like that, because the sisters even say to Ahsoka, Ahsoka sees the perception of the Jedi as decidedly different than what she thought it was, all of those sorts of things. But coming back to Mace, what I realized reading this book was obviously Watson has less to work on than what we have at this point.
Sure.
But what's very interesting is the character of Mace Windu. What really struck me this time as I'm reading this is by bringing Mace in and having him be in his steady state prior to the outbreak of the Clone Wars. Even though it does go through the series of the Clone Wars largely, I suddenly realized what a magnificent job Sam Jackson actually did in portraying, somebody who was a hard ass, but a really self-disciplined hard ass, somebody who had a tight rein on everything, who even when it gets to Geonosis, you can see he's ready to break, but he doesn't. And it actually makes his break in Revenge of the Sith even more interesting and satisfying, because when he does lose it, you see exactly what he's holding on to. And we've talked about it before. I love Mace Windu. I'm convinced that if Windu had killed Palpatine, he winds up crossing over. And he's dangerously close to falling in that moment. And I think even if he doesn't kill Palpatine, he's dangerously close to falling in that moment. But I think reading this was one of those little treats that helps crystallize that journey even more, because you realize that Mace was so locked down. And it made me appreciate Sam Jackson. It made me even appreciate what Lucas did even more with the character, because everybody expected Sam Jackson to be Mace Windu in episode 3 the whole time. And we actually do get a journey through Windu's character just in the prequel films that I think is subtly and interestingly done. And this book, I think, taps into that, which I found surprising.
Yeah, I think that the beauty of that is the way in which, Mace is faced with the same thing that Obi-Wan is, which is the loss of everything that he knows, right? And the way that they handle that is very different.
Yeah.
And so I think, like you said, that this book helps even create another link in the chain for that character, to which Jude Watson does such a great job of connecting with. And, again, I'll say that I feel like this series itself should have been the basis for an animated show, because it's just such a rich place to be playing in this era as, the Jedi learn to kind of like find their place in any way. And it's before the Great Fall, and it gives you an opportunity to really understand what the Jedi Order was meant to be, but at the same time, to be able to see some kinks in the armor, which will cause them to fall. But this series, I thought one of the most impressive parts about the book was the way in which Watson is able to show just how far the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi has come, so that he is the one in this book, with what's happened with Qui-Gon, with the emotional turmoil that Qui-Gon is in. He is actually the steady one. He is the one that's kind of worried about his master and trying to remind his master and keep his master from falling off the edge of that cliff. And so I think she did a really good job of kind of allowing you to experience the fear that Obi-Wan has is he is worried for his master and whether he's going to make the wrong choice, and that he wants to be there for his master to help him make the right choice, So I think that was something that I really gravitated towards. And, I love both of these characters so much. I'm a huge Qui-Gon fan, as you are, and of course Obi-Wan's my favorite character. And so to be able to have seen this progression through this entire series till you get to this point where we have the roles reversed is a beautiful thing, because it just shows you how far the character of Obi-Wan, who's only 16 in this book, has really come.
Yeah, and he's not too far off from where we're going to meet him in The Phantom Menace. And so it's nice to see him get to that point. But let's address the Bantha in the room here, the Ronto in the room, however we want to say it. We see all of these great things, especially where we can contextualize it in the modern day and the afterward release stuff for the Jedi and those characters. The plot overall of the book, where did you fall with it? How do you feel that this was the right way to wrap up the story? Do you feel that it was too ambitious, not ambitious enough? Where did you fall with the actual plot of the book here?
It's really ambitious. I would say that. I mean, Watson is definitely being, I think, the most ambitious she's been in the series with this. One of the things that I really gravitated towards because of that ambition was the way in which she's playing with all the different politics here that the Jedi are going to get themselves involved in, and how fraught that is. Just fraught with danger, for the Jedi to be involved in this level of politics. One of the things that I really loved was the way in which the twin daughters use the ability of people to think emotionally with them instead of rationally as a way to fool everyone. And it felt so poignant for today on the way in which we prey upon the emotionalism of people so that they can't think rationally. They're only thinking with their emotions. And therefore, they make decisions that are not wise. And then those in power, or those that actually are in charge of their faculties, that because they're not thinking emotionally, are the ones who are able to take charge. And it just crystallizes beautifully as the kind of pivot point of this story as to how people like that can play anyone, even Jedi, in this story. Yeah. And so, and it's a beautiful little connection point to exactly what's going to happen with the Jedi overall throughout the Clone Wars, as Palpatine does the exact same thing with the Jedi. So to me, even just talking about it now, it's coming together how much I really thought that this story works.
I agree with you that it's very ambitious. I enjoyed it overall. I do think that the themes were good. I think that it got a little too ambitious at points. I don't know if ambitious is necessarily the right word, but for instance, we take the detour where they go back to Mota to talk about the reprogrammed droids. And that is, it's proof that Watson is thinking very, she's making sure she's not leaving any stone unturned.
Right.
For me to go back and say, well, wait, what about? But at the same time, I was left questioning, was that really necessary? Could it have been done quicker or easier? And if it could or it couldn't, I'm just curious about how it plays out, if she streamlined that part a little bit. It's one of those things where it's not necessarily a fault, because I'm not sitting here and I'm not going to rewrite it, and I don't even have the urge to rewrite it. If I dislike a plot enough, I sit there and I start rewriting it. I start saying, oh, well, this makes more sense if you snip this out and you move this around and that sort of thing. And I sort of like play editor in my head, right? Because I edit a lot of things, in my life. It's just a natural setting. And while that's the case, I also do think that it probably could have stood just a little bit of tightening to jump from point to point, because once you see where it's going, I think that it indulges too much the head faking yes, it's Balog that's bad. No, it's not Balog that's bad. Well, wait, yes, it is Balog that's bad. And I think that is to its detriment overall as well.
I do think that you have a really good point on that, though. I mean, I felt a little bit the same in that because it is interesting to watch her try to make sure that an audience member who's reading the book wouldn't have any questions. If you thought back on the series, like she's really trying to make sure that there aren't any unanswered questions or plot holes in that sense, so she's really covering her bases with that. But it did feel like that there maybe should have been a slight refinement. So there's like one less moment of that. I absolutely agree. In it, I do think that one of the things that I have seen throughout the entire series is something to which she does have a habit of doing, which is trying to kind of flip the script in the sense of like who you think is the bad guy isn't really the bad guy and all those kind of things. And I think like what you're saying here, it just happened one too many times.
So with all of that said, as many positives and the challenges with the plot, I'm dying to know where you ended up rating wise with it on a scale of 1 to 5. Where did you end up with this?
I think I would have to give this a 4 out of 5 because I feel like it did a great job of resolving the storyline for the characters of Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and where we end up with them, which is really the point of this, and I loved, like we talked about, the usage of Mace Windu. I thought that was really good and really well done. So I had no complaints about that. And even though I might have liked to have seen a couple of little things done here and there to kind of tighten some things up or streamline some things, it didn't hurt my enjoyment of the story, and it didn't hurt the, I think, validity of what we kind of talked about thematically either, So those are some minor quibbles, but overall, I think the beauty of this is that it continues to be a fantastic series, which, leads me excited to see what Jude Watson has in store for the final 2 books of the series, and then, the specials that she does.
I am interested in seeing what the final, how this is all going to wrap up and the specials and everything. I did enjoy this. I did like the book. Again, like most of the books, it's a relatively quick read. I'm not a fast reader, but I do enjoy a book like this it is clean, man. It is nice and quick, but not in a bad way. It's not quick in that bad way where you're like, okay, let's just go through. It's quick in the sense that it's light and it moves. And Watson's really good at that. I think I've mentioned this before, where there's a current series called Horizon where Watson has written some books, and my daughter is big. One of my daughters was big into the series, and I read it, and Watson's books were always the one that they just zip through. So there's a real gift for making the story move, even though there are parts that I want cut up and everything. But that I always look through it through that lens of, is there anything here for a non-Star Wars fan to jump in with? Counterpoint being, why would they pick up at this book?
Sure.
They would be dumb. Why would you pick up this late in the series?
This would not be the
for
place
your first
to jump
book?
in.
So that's sort of an invalid thing. I think I probably wind up on a 3.5. If I'm having a bad day, I wind up dragging it down to a 3. Because I think these things should be re-edited or should have been more streamlined. But because I enjoyed it and because I could sit here, again, and we keep coming back to this with the series, because I can sit here and I can have an interesting discussion with my friend about what Qui-Gon's struggle might mean in terms of Anakin later, what Obi-Wan's growth means in terms of how I'm going to encounter him and how his arc is going to be affected, with gaining an appreciation again for how Sam Jackson plays Mace Windu and the way that George Lucas structured it. Since Goodreads locks me in to whole stars only, I wound up bumping it up to a 4. I enjoyed it. It was good. It moved along. And it did what it set out to do, which was it gave me some character moments that I was interested in, and I had a good time. So I'll round up, and I give it a 4 as well.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think one of the best parts about the series is just, as we've mentioned over and over again, is its strength. And the fact that it continues to be strong and it's kept our interest this long, I think is what's fascinating about it. And it's a fun series. And again, I would just love to see them kind of mine this era. You have the new canon and you have that ability. So, do it.
Why not use the resources?
I mean, there's no reason not to, whether it's a book series, a comic book series, an animated series, this is all just right there for you to be able to give fans great Star Wars content that they will absolutely love. And so, yeah, I don't know why you wouldn't do it. But, John, if people want to tell you why they think that this should be a series, where can they find you on social media?
Oh, nobody wants to find me on social media, but if you have that broken impulse, you can find me as Kessel Junkie, KESSELJUNKIE, and you can find me on your social network of choice usually, but Letterboxd is the most fun. Can't talk about anything too controversial over there, so enjoy me watching bad movies and writing pithy reviews of them to make it through the long, hard work days that we face. And you can find me here on the network co-hosting a show called House Lights, where we go through the works of directors broken up by decade or by other metrics that are actually a lot of fun. And I co-host that here on the network. Have a really good time with it. But you can also find me as we transfer over to where you can find Matt. You can also find me appearing occasionally on Matt's show, the 602 Club over on TFM, and our show Snyder Cuts, where we looked at the works of Zack Snyder. And we have a super secret project, not so secret project, but it'll be coming up in October. So keep paying attention to that feed. But Matt, where can people find you out there in the wild, wild west of the internet?
Well, you could find me there on the open range of ridiculousness under the name Matt Rushing02 on those feeds. Just search for me there, follow me there. Would love to talk to you and interact with you. Like you said, there on the TFM network with the 602 Club, as well as Literary Treks and the Orb. Literary Treks about the books and the comics of Star Trek, and the Orb's about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And may even be on something special coming up soon on that network as well, so you might want to look on the feed for that. Also, you could find me here on the network with a completed show I did with Drea Kaufman called Owlpost, where he talked about each and every chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. But you know what, John? I don't know about you, but I feel like it's time to go back to the temple and just get a good cup of caf.
Master Rushing, caf is exactly what I could go for, so I say these negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.